And how did they like As You Like It? As You Like It must have been successful in its day, but it did not attract much critical attention. This waited until the 18th century, and even then, not much. A critic in 1765 found it wild and pleasing, the character of Jacques natural and well preserved, the comic dialogue very sprightly with less mixture of low buffoonery than in some other plays, and the graver part elegant and harmonious. Lamented by the critic was an absence of more religious instruction. These observations are characteristic of much 18th century criticism. Francis Gentleman, writing in 1770, basically concurs. He knows of no more agreeable piece on stage than As You Like It. Since the play's characters are various, its incidents certainly pleasing, even if not striking, its sentiments generally pregnant with useful meaning, and its language, though quaint in some places, showing a general strength and spirit worthy of Shakespeare's pen. Yet the play suffers from a severe invasion of the unities and a plot hurried on to an imperfect catastrophe, in which the unnatural and abominable brother Oliver is undeservedly rewarded with fortune and love. Again, there was a real hang-up on moral edification there. Critics did drool a bit over Jacques, though finding him an amiable though solitary moralist. Romantic critics tended to like the spontaneous. Jacques continued to be a favorite. William Hazlitt called Jacques the only purely contemplative character in Shakespeare. His only passion is thought. He sets no value upon anything but as it serves as food for reflection. Hermann Ulrichi is similarly delighted by Jacques's meditative superficiality, his witty sentimentality, his merry sadness, and above all, his melancholy contempt of life and men. Of Rosalind, critic Anna Jameson states, she displays an exquisitely blended and volatile compound of essences. She is sprightly, imaginative, vivacious, and able to don masculine attire without the slightest impugnment of her delicacy. The Romantics celebrated Rosalind as a shining example of the Shakespearean romantic heroine. Touchstone comes to be appreciated as a personification of caprice and ridicule, who shares Jacques's perception of human failings, but with a fool's capricious folly and foolish capriciousness. Perhaps, when we think of the duality of As You Like It, a more thorough examination of Touchstone and Jacques would be worthwhile. Overall, Romantic critics saw As You Like It as the very embodiment of the Romantic spirit. For Nathan Drake, there is something inexpressibly wild and interesting both in the characters and in the scenery. In Hazlitt's view, the very air of the place seems to breathe the spirit of philosophical poetry, to stir the thoughts, to touch the heart with pity as the drowsy forest rustles to the sighing gale. August W. von Schlegel rejoices to see how the unlimited freedom of the wilderness compensates Duke Senior and his followers for the lost conveniences of life, thus demonstrating that nothing is wanted to call forth the poetry which has its dwelling in nature and the human mind, but to throw off all artificial constraint and restore both to their native liberty. Indeed, a call to romantic idealism. Victorian criticism tends to exalt Shakespeare as a poet and philosopher rather than as a playwright. Charles and Mary Cowden Clarke, in their edition of 1864, stress the literary and generic features of The Forest of Arden. It represents a poetical first generally, where lovers, dukes, lords, shepherds, jesters, natural philosophers and artificial philosophers, lions and lambs, serpents and goats, oaks and olives, palm trees and osiers, may all flourish contentedly and plausibly without disturbing the peace of those whose imaginations accept the truths of poetry as universal truth, not mere geographical, animal, or botanical literalities. Arden becomes the archetype of poetic and romantic forests. Critics such as these see Arden as a wholesome and restorative place inhabited for the most part by charitable and loving folks. The moral contrast of country and court is edifyingly plain. Values of generosity, Forbearance, good nature, honesty, and chaste if romantic affection help define Shakespeare as an upholder of decency and idealism. Despite a few sexual double entendres, offered especially by Touchstone, As You Like It is seen as good, innocent, Disney-esque entertainment. Edward Dowden is sure that the marked preference for Arden over the envious court is autobiographical. Shakespeare turned with a sense of relief and a long, easeful sigh from the oppressive subjects of history, so grave, so real, so massive, and found rest and freedom and pleasure in escape from courts and camps to the forest of Arden. And that's food for thought, because Shakespeare grew up in a bucolic Stratford-on-Avon, and his mother's family name was Arden. In another nod to duality, Rosalind ceaselessly delighted Victorian readers. I say readers because their love of the bard was more literary than theatrical. With her complementary qualities of adventurousness and sagacity, mischievousness and tenderness, sense of humor and romantic passion, courage and weakness. She is at once a grace, a muse, an angel, an imp, says Daniel O'Sullivan. Such is the woman that God has made. George Gervinus finds her loyal in her friendships, innately good-humored, enterprising, plucky, and delightfully iconoclastic. She is especially winsome in her manner of deflating the coquettishness that is so often attributed to her sex, says Helena Fawcett Martin. Male critics tended to appreciate Rosalind's robust beauty and charm with the absence of a sharp edge. Women were drawn to Rosalind because she is so unhampered by claptrap romantic illusions about falling in love. Some Victorians didn't enjoy Jacques the way the Romantics did. In George Gervinus's view, Jacques is far more of a rude fault-finder than a contented sufferer like the rest. Hippolyte Adolphe Taine is more sympathetic. Says Taine, he is sad because he is tender. He feels the contact of things too keenly, and what leaves the rest indifferent makes him weep. Though these critics disagree as to whether Shakespeare meant Jacques to be sympathetic, their devotion to the art of character study aimed at calibrating morality is evident. Of Touchstone, Charles Clark offers, Touchstone is the sort of sweet-natured person who is able to make himself happy and contented wherever fortune chances to cast him. He is gay and easy at court. He is good-tempered and at ease in the forest. Touchstone carries his own sunshine about with him. J.C. Smith was delighted with Touchstone's oft-quoted antithesis between the country and the court, which he sums up with a nicety that leaves not a straw to choose between them. Henry Ruggles claims Touchstone's bit of self-sacrifice in giving up the creature comforts of the court puts him in accord with that kindness and friendship which are made the chief motives of the piece. So for Victorian critics generally, As You Like It is a profoundly benign play, one inhabited by persons who we would dearly like to know better. Even its villains are not incorrigible. Isn't that nice? This buoyantly optimistic view of As You Like It continues even now. The play is seen as a comedy of forgiveness, a subgenre of romantic comedy. Arthur Keillor-Crouch tells us, As You Like It reveals Shakespeare at his happiest, showing us men and women who are lost to the world for a time to indulge their own happy proclivities and go back somehow, regenerated. Not everyone gushes with sunshine, though. J. Dover Wilson warns us not to miss the vein of mockery that runs throughout, manifesting itself in the portrait of an aged servant, Adam, about to perish from hunger, or of Oliver arriving in the forest, footsore, in rags, and so dog-tired that when he falls asleep even a snake coiling around his throat is not able to wake him. Our first glimpse of Arden is in wintertime. Carolyn Spurgeon observes of the play's persistent nature imagery that it includes talk of thorny woods, briars, burrs, and broken ears in the harvest field. Edward A. Armstrong points out how important are the doctrine of the fall of man and the story of the prodigal son as archetypes and background for the play. These folks are in desperate need of a hug, right? Modern critics like to look at the history and ask, in what ways does As You Like It reflect events in the late 1590s? They're generally agreed that the play shows a timely interest in the pastoral, in literary satire, in the stylus affection of melancholy, and in faddish allusions to humor psychology as manifested in George Chapman's An Humorous Day's Mirth from 1597, and Ben Jonson's Every Man in His Humor, and elsewhere. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London issued an edict prohibiting satires on June 1st, 1599. One wonders if Celia's line, "The little wit that fools have was silenced," alludes to this suppression of satire. Quite interesting is the play's supposed relationship to a political controversy and the trouble being stirred up by Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, which would erupt into an abortive rebellion in 1601. George Chalmers was the first to suggest in 1799 that the exile of Duke Senior to the Forest of Arden might reflect the sequestration of Essex when he returned from Ireland, having been unsuccessful there in September 1599. There are other historical musings too. All one can say is, maybe not, who will ever know? And for us, 1599 is a long damn time ago. As modern audiences view As You Like It, issues of gender and sexuality have gained increasing visibility. The idea that sexual identity is largely performed or constructed rather than genetically fixed lends itself adroitly to Shakespeare's practice in this play, as also in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Merchant of Venice, Twelfth Night, and Cymbeline. Unquestionably, Shakespeare is playing with ambiguities of sexual identity and with hints of homoeroticism. After all, Rosalind chooses to disguise herself with the name Ganymede, Zeus's young male cupbearer and lover. Feminist thought has highlighted the audacity and originality of Shakespeare's conception of Rosalind, writes Juliette Duesenberg, analyzing the ways in which the play participates in an Elizabethan questioning of attitudes to women. Stage history, as Duesenberg observes, has often documented the thinness of the line separating masculine from feminine in As You Like It. Unisex styles in clothing and haircut in recent years complicate the issue of how to convey the maleness of Rosalind's disguise, but by the same token enrich the opportunities for exploring ambiguity of sexual identity. In 1599, Shakespeare had to negotiate the delicate matter of widespread disapproval of cross-dressing women. Puritanical opposition to theater thrived on what was regarded as transgressive, and male egos felt threatened by women assuming male roles. The play does close on an array of heterosexual unions, though it arrives at that conclusion in an endlessly playful manner. Rosalind, in her/his epilogue, thereupon courts both women and men in the audience, erasing the boundary also between stage character and stage performer. As You Like It is thus a play with a particular relevance for theater audiences and readers today.